April 1st, 1945. 06 hours, 15 minutes. The pencil scratches across the page, each stroke deliberate, controlled. Lieutenant Nurse Elisabeth Brenner writes in a leather-bound notebook, her handwriting precise despite 37 consecutive hours awake. Child number 127 deceased, dysentery, third death this week. She pauses, staring at the small body on the cot before her, still warm. The girl was 6 years old. Her name was Anna. Through the window of the field hospital, Elisabeth can see them. 42 military trucks rolling past in convoy formation, engines rumbling, exhaust clouds rising in the cold morning air. Each truck carries supplies marked non-critical, secondary priority. Each truck has capacity for 67 passengers. She does the calculation automatically now, the numbers forming in her mind like a reflex. 42 trucks. Capacity, 2,814 persons. Children currently awaiting evacuation in this facility, 263. Percentage of capacity required, 9.3%. What Lieutenant Brenner didn't know, as she closed little Anna's eyes and returned to her calculations, was that she was documenting the mathematical proof of a choice. Not a tragedy of insufficient resources, not the inevitable cost of war. A choice. And in the weeks that followed, those numbers would force generals to confront a truth they'd spent months avoiding. The children weren't dying because evacuation was impossible. They were dying because evacuating them was inconvenient. 6 months earlier, October 1944. The autumn offensive had pushed the front lines eastward faster than anyone anticipated, leaving behind a wake of liberated territory and displaced populations. In the town of Merchtem, 23 kilometers west of Brussels, the Allied command established a provisional medical facility in what had been a Catholic boarding school. The building was structurally sound, possessed adequate water supply, and offered 317 beds across 4 floors. It was designated Field Hospital 17, classified as a transitional medical facility, meant to stabilize wounded soldiers before transport to permanent hospitals in the rear. But warfare creates orphans faster than it creates casualties. By December, the hospital had accumulated its unintended population. Children, refugees, orphans whose parents had been killed in the fighting, whose homes had been destroyed, who had nowhere else to go. They arrived in groups of 5, 10, 20 at a time, brought by well-meaning soldiers, local clergy, resistance fighters who couldn't simply leave them to freeze in bombed-out buildings. The hospital staff, bound by medical oaths and basic human decency, took them in, fed them, treated their illnesses, waited for evacuation orders that should have come within days. Those orders never came. Lieutenant Elisabeth Brenner had arrived at Field Hospital 17 on November 3rd. 31 years old, trained at the University of Heidelberg before the war. She'd served in 6 different field hospitals over 3 years. She'd seen amputations without anesthesia, soldiers bleeding out in triage lines, the full catalog of wartime medical horror. But she'd never seen what she found in Merchtem, systematic bureaucratic neglect dressed up as logistical necessity. The numbers were there from the beginning, visible to anyone who cared to look. Weekly supply manifest for Field Hospital 17, 718 kilograms of medical supplies, 92 kilograms of surgical instruments, 437 liters of disinfectant, 1,241 units of morphine. Weekly transport allocation, 16 ambulances for wounded soldiers, average turnaround time 8.2 hours. Weekly transport allocation for civilian evacuees, 0. Not insufficient, 0. Captain Medical Corps Heinrich Vogel, the hospital's administrative officer, explained it during Elisabeth's first week. The children are temporary. Civilian affairs will process them soon. Our priority is combat casualties. He was 46, career military, a man who'd learned that following procedures was safer than questioning them. We've submitted the evacuation requests. It's a matter of logistics, Lieutenant. Transportation is limited. The front has priority. But Elisabeth had already begun counting. 218 children currently in the facility. Average age, 7.3 years. Youngest, 4 months old. Oldest, 14. Medical conditions: malnutrition in 172 cases, respiratory infections in 89, dysentery in 43, typhoid in 6. 3 critical cases requiring immediate hospitalization beyond field capabilities. Evacuation requests submitted: November 6th, November 13th, November 20th, November 27th. Evacuation authorizations granted: 0. Meanwhile, she watched the trucks. Every day, convoys rolled past: supply trucks, transport trucks, trucks carrying ammunition, food, fuel, spare parts, mail, propaganda leaflets, office equipment. She started documenting them in her notebook. November 30th. 37 trucks observed. Estimated combined capacity 1,940 persons. Estimated cargo priority mixed. December 1st. 41 trucks observed. Estimated combined capacity 2,209 persons. December 2nd. 29 trucks. The pattern was undeniable. The resources existed. The capacity existed. What didn't exist was priority. Oberarzt, senior physician, Klaus Hartmann, noticed her notebooks during rounds. 53 years old, a pediatric specialist before the war, he'd been treating the children with whatever supplies he could requisition. "You're counting trucks now, Lieutenant?" His tone was gentle, but his eyes were tired, knowing. "Yes, sir," Elisabeth replied. "Someone should." "And what will you do with those numbers?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "But they tell a story, and eventually someone needs to hear it." Dr. Hartmann was quiet for a moment, then gestured to a boy in the bed beside them. "This is Jacob, 9 years old, pneumonia. He needs a proper hospital, heated wards, antibiotics we don't have here. He's been waiting for evacuation for 3 weeks." He paused. "When I requested emergency transport, I was told transport assets were fully allocated to operational priorities. That same day, I watched 17 trucks drive past carrying Christmas packages for the troops. 17 trucks, Elisabeth. Each one could have held this boy." The doctor's voice remained clinical, but his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted Jakob's blanket. "You want to know what the story is? The story is that saving this child is classified as non-operational. Delivering Christmas cards is classified as morale essential. The mathematics of that distinction, Lieutenant. The mathematics are perfect, and perfectly obscene." That conversation stayed with Elisabeth. That night, she began a second notebook. Not just observations, calculations, comparisons, evidence. December brought winter, and winter brought death. The boarding school building, adequate for its original purpose, was never designed to house hundreds of malnourished children through Belgian winter. The heating system, damaged during occupation, functioned at perhaps 30% capacity. Coal rations allocated to the hospital were calculated based on military personnel count only. The 263 children, officially temporary civilian presence pending transfer, received no allocation. Child deaths: December 3rd, December 5th, December 7th, December 10th, December 14th. All respiratory infections, all preventable with proper facilities. Elisabeth documented each one. Name, age, date of death, cause, date evacuation was first requested. She documented them because someone needed to remember that these weren't statistics. They were children who'd survived occupation, bombardment, starvation, who'd made it to what should have been safety, only to die waiting for a bureaucracy to acknowledge their existence. And she documented the trucks. 63 vehicles observed December 3rd through December 7th. Combined capacity: 4,191 persons. Purpose: ammunition resupply to forward positions rated adequate current stock. Not critical, not emergency. Adequate. The numbers grew sharper, more detailed. Elisabeth began timing the convoys, noting their frequency, their loads, their destinations when visible. She cross-referenced with supply manifests when she could access them, building a comprehensive picture of exactly how transportation resources were being allocated. December 15th. Morning convoy of 19 trucks carrying fuel to depot already at 78% capacity. Afternoon convoy of 23 trucks carrying replacement uniforms, classified routine supply rotation. Evening convoy of 14 trucks carrying correspondence and recreational equipment. Total trucks that day, 56. Total capacity, 3,712 persons. Total evacuations authorized for 263 children requiring immediate medical attention, 0. Proportion, infinite trucks per permitted evacuation. She showed the numbers to Captain Vogel. His office was on the second floor, a former teacher's quarters with a desk, filing cabinets, and a window overlooking the convoy route. Elisabeth laid her notebook open in front of him. Captain, I've been documenting transport allocation for 6 weeks. The data shows clear excess capacity. Vogel barely glanced at the numbers. Lieutenant, military logistics are complex. You're observing vehicles, not their complete operational context. Those trucks have assigned purposes, predetermined routes, supply chain obligations. You can't simply redirect them because they happen to pass by our location. Sir, with respect, I'm not suggesting random redirection. I'm showing that our evacuation requests are being denied, while simultaneously, daily, we observe transportation assets moving cargo classified as low priority. 3,712 person capacity yesterday alone. We need capacity for 263 children, 7.1%. The children aren't military priority, Lieutenant. They're children, sir. They're civilian affairs responsibility, Vogel said, his voice taking on the practiced tone of a man who'd given this explanation before. We've filed the proper requests with the appropriate offices. The system will process them in due course. This hospital's primary mission is combat casualty care. That remains our focus. Elisabeth felt something cold settle in her chest. Sir, 5 children have died this month, all from treatable conditions, all while waiting for evacuation that requires 7% of the transportation capacity we observe being used daily for non-critical cargo. Vogel closed her notebook, pushed it back across the desk. Your dedication to these children is admirable, Lieutenant, but you're a nurse, not a logistical officer. The decisions about transportation allocation are made at levels far above this hospital, based on operational requirements you and I don't fully understand. I suggest you focus on providing the best care possible with available resources and trust that the system is functioning as designed. Elisabeth picked up her notebook. And if the system is designed to let children die while trucks carry Christmas packages, sir, what then? The captain's expression hardened. That's dangerously close to insubordination, Lieutenant. You're dismissed. She left the office, but she didn't stop counting. December 21st, the shortest day of the year. Elisabeth was in the children's ward when she heard the coughing. Wet, rattling, the sound of fluid in small lungs. A girl, maybe 8 years old, named Maria. She'd been admitted 4 days earlier with early-stage pneumonia, treatable with rest and warmth in a proper facility. But Field Hospital 17 wasn't a proper facility. It was a way station, and Maria was deteriorating. Dr. Hartman examined her, his stethoscope moving across her back, his frown deepening with each breath sound. She needs a real hospital, today, not tomorrow, not next week. The infection is spreading. We don't have the equipment to manage this if it progresses further. Elisabeth already had her notebook open. I'll request emergency medical evacuation. I've already submitted 3 emergency requests this week, Hartman said quietly. All denied. Insufficient priority classification. Then I'll submit a 4th. She went directly to the communications office, bypassing Captain Vogel entirely. Corporal Emil Schneider, the duty officer, took her written request with evident sympathy. Lieutenant, I'll transmit this immediately, but I should tell you, the last 11 emergency evacuation requests from this facility have been denied at regional command level. They're not even reaching the officers who could authorize transport. There's a policy. What policy? Elisabeth demanded. Schneider glanced around, then lowered his voice. Unofficial word from regional command. Field Hospital 17 has become a civilian processing bottleneck. They think if they authorize evacuations, it'll encourage more civilian concentrations at field hospitals, complicating military medical operations. So they're waiting us out, waiting for us to somehow process the children through civilian channels that don't actually exist anymore. Elisabeth felt the cold sensation in her chest expand into something sharper. They're deliberately denying evacuation to discourage us from accepting more children? I didn't say that, ma'am. That's just what I've heard. And how many children have died while they wait us out? Schneider didn't answer. He didn't need to. Elisabeth returned to Maria's bedside. The girl was sleeping fitfully, her breathing labored. Her mother had been killed in an artillery strike 6 weeks earlier. Her father's status was unknown. She'd been brought to the hospital by a British chaplain who'd found her wandering alone in a destroyed village, crying for her mama. Now she was dying in a converted boarding school because evacuating her would set a bad precedent for regional logistics policy. That night, Elisabeth couldn't sleep. She sat in the staff quarters, her notebooks spread around her, and she began to calculate. Not just observations anymore, complete analysis. She went back through 6 weeks of documentation, cross-referenced every convoy with every death, built a comprehensive mathematical argument that would be impossible to dismiss as emotional overreaction or logistical ignorance. The numbers were devastating. Total transport capacity observed passing Field Hospital 17, December 1st through December 20th, 473 individual vehicles. Average capacity per vehicle, 66.4 persons. Total capacity, 31,417 person spaces. Actual military personnel transported, estimated 22,300 based on visible occupancy. Estimated cargo requiring vehicle space, 7,900 person space equivalents. Surplus capacity, 1,217 person spaces. Children requiring evacuation, 263. Percentage of surplus capacity required, 21.6%. Not just possible, easy. She documented cargo priorities. Of the 473 observed vehicles, 147 carried ammunition and fuel classified critical. 109 carried medical supplies and food classified essential. 68 carried replacement equipment classified standard resupply. 92 carried mail, recreational supplies, administrative materials classified morale and administrative. 57 carried cargo of indeterminate priority. The morale and administrative category alone had transported enough capacity to evacuate the children 4 times over. Then she calculated the cost. 8 children dead in December. Average time from admission to death, 14.6 days. Average time from first evacuation request to death, 19.3 days. In every single case, death occurred from conditions that were treatable in a proper medical facility. In every single case, evacuation had been requested and denied, while transport assets passed the hospital carrying cargo classified as lower priority than human life. She wrote it out as a formal report, 11 pages of detailed analysis with supporting data. She titled it, Transportation Resource Allocation Analysis, Field Hospital 17, December 1944. It was dry, technical, comprehensive, and it proved mathematically and irrefutably that 8 children had died not because evacuation was impossible, but because evacuating them was inconvenient. December 22nd, 0700 hours. Elisabeth requested a meeting with the hospital commander, Oberstleutnant, Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Mannheim. He was 58, a career medical officer, a man who'd commanded field hospitals since 1941. His office was on the top floor, overlooking the convoy route, and when Elisabeth entered, he was standing at the window, watching the morning supply convoy roll past. 26 trucks. Capacity, 1,724 persons. Lieutenant Brenner, he said without turning. Captain Vogel tells me you've become quite focused on transportation matters. Sir, I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of truck movements. Yes. He turned to face her. I've been a field hospital commander for 3 years, Lieutenant. I've learned that well-meaning junior officers sometimes develop fixations. Usually it's supply shortages. Sometimes it's perceived inequities in treatment priorities. In your case, it's the civilian children. Sir, with respect, this isn't a fixation. It's documentation. She held out the report. 11 pages of data showing that evacuation of the children isn't a logistical impossibility. It's a priority choice. Mannheim took the report, gestured for her to sit, and began reading. His expression didn't change as he turned pages, scanning her calculations, her comparisons, her conclusions. When he finished, he set it down carefully and looked at her with something like sadness. "This is very thorough work, Lieutenant." "Thank you, sir." "It's also completely pointless." Elisabeth felt as though she'd been slapped. "Sir, do you think you're the first person to notice this?" Mannheim asked quietly. "Do you think I haven't seen the same convoys, done the same calculations, reached the same conclusions? I've submitted 17 formal requests for child evacuation authorization since November. 17. All denied. I've escalated through medical command, through regional logistics, through civilian affairs coordination. Nothing. The children aren't military priority. They aren't yet processed as civilian refugees. They exist in a bureaucratic void where no one has authority or responsibility, or, quite frankly, interest. Then we make them interested," Elisabeth said. This report proves what everyone already knows and no one cares about," Mannheim interrupted. "The system isn't broken, Lieutenant. It's working exactly as designed. Military assets serve military purposes. Civilian affairs serves civilian populations. And when war creates situations that don't fit neatly into those categories, people fall through the gaps, including children. So we just let them die? We do our jobs," Mannheim said firmly. "We provide the best medical care possible with available resources. We continue submitting requests through proper channels. We trust that eventually the system will respond. What we don't do is crusade against logistics policies we don't have authority to change." Elisabeth stood slowly, taking back her report. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Denied. You're dismissed, Lieutenant." She left the office, but she kept the report. Maria died that afternoon. She was child number 133. Elisabeth held her hand as her breathing gradually stopped, felt the small fingers go limp, and something inside her shifted. She'd been a military nurse for 3 years. She'd followed orders, respected hierarchy, trusted the system. She'd believed that discipline and procedure existed to make impossible situations manageable. But Maria's death wasn't impossible. It was chosen. That night, Elisabeth made her decision. She would go over Mannheim's head, over regional command. She would take her report directly to divisional headquarters, present it to officers with actual authority to change policy. It would probably end her career, certainly end it if she failed. But Maria's fingers going limp in hers had clarified something. Some things mattered more than careers. December 23rd, Elisabeth requested a 48-hour leave, citing family emergency. It was approved with perfunctory sympathy. She used it to travel to Brussels, to divisional headquarters, to request a meeting with the logistics coordination officer. She was told that lieutenant nurses did not request meetings with colonel-level staff without going through proper channels. She explained she'd tried proper channels. She was told to submit a written request. She handed over her 11-page report. The adjutant promised someone would review it. She returned to Field Hospital 17 on Christmas Eve, her report still unacknowledged, her leave time exhausted, her prospects increasingly grim. Captain Vogel called her to his office within an hour of her return. His expression was cold. "Lieutenant, did you travel to Brussels to submit complaints about this hospital's operations to divisional staff?" "I submitted a logistics analysis, sir, through appropriate channels." "You went over the head of your commanding officer to complain to headquarters about matters outside your authority," Vogel said sharply. "That's insubordination. Oberstleutnant Mannheim is prepared to convene a disciplinary board. The report contains only factual data, sir. Transport observations, capacity calculations, casualty records. If that's considered insubordination, then mathematics itself is insubordinate." Vogel's jaw tightened. "You're treading very dangerous ground, Lieutenant. I suggest you focus on your duties and abandon this crusade before you destroy your career entirely." "Children are dying, Captain." "Children die in war," Vogel snapped. "That's tragic, but it's reality. Your job is to care for them as best you can, not to prosecute the logistics command for following established policies." Elisabeth felt the cold sensation return, sharper now, colder. "What if established policy is killing them, sir?" "Then that's above your pay grade, dismissed." But she wasn't dismissed from the war, and the war had one more lesson to teach her. December 27th, early morning. Elisabeth was updating patient records when Corporal Schneider appeared in the ward, his face pale. "Lieutenant, you need to come see something." She followed him to the window overlooking the convoy route. There, stretching as far as she could see, was the largest convoy she'd witnessed. Truck after truck after truck, perhaps 70 vehicles, maybe 80, rolling past in seemingly endless procession. She grabbed her notebook, began counting automatically. 73 trucks. Capacity, 4,834 persons. "What are they carrying?" she asked. Schneider handed her a manifest he'd pulled from the communication logs. Celebrating supplies for New Year's festivities. Division-wide celebration. Alcohol, entertainment equipment, decorative materials, special food rations. Classified as critical morale priority. Elisabeth stared at the convoy, then at the manifest, then at the ward behind her where 263 children waited for evacuation. 73 trucks, 4,834 person capacity, carrying party supplies, past a hospital where children were dying. She felt something break inside her. Not despair, clarity. "Get Dr. Hartman," she said quietly, "and anyone else who'll listen. We're going to stop that convoy." Schneider's eyes widened. "Lieutenant, that's correct," Elisabeth interrupted. "That's exactly what it is. Get the doctor, now." 20 minutes later, 8 people stood in front of Field Hospital 17 as the convoy continued to roll past. Elisabeth, Dr. Hartman, 3 other nurses, 2 medical orderlies, Corporal Schneider. Not nearly enough to physically stop 73 military trucks, but enough to make a scene, enough to force a confrontation. Elisabeth stepped into the road. The lead truck's brakes squealed, the vehicle lurching to a halt 3 meters from her. The driver, an Obergefreiter, corporal, named Ludwig Brecht, leaned out the window. "Ma'am, you need to clear the road. This is a priority convoy. This is a military hospital with 263 children requiring emergency medical evacuation," Elisabeth called back. "Your convoy has capacity to transport them. I'm requesting you authorize emergency loading." "Ma'am, I don't have authority to modify convoy orders. Please step aside." "No." Elisabeth didn't move. Behind her, the others spread across the road. Not until someone with authority to make transport decisions appears and personally explains why 73 trucks full of party supplies have priority over dying children. The convoy ground to a halt. Drivers exited trucks. Within minutes, a Hauptmann, captain, named Werner Koch, arrived from further back in the column. He was livid. "Who is responsible for this obstruction?" "I am," Elisabeth said. "Lieutenant Nurse Elisabeth Brenner. And I'm not moving until you address the logistics disparity I'm about to show you." She pulled out her notebook, opened it to the relevant pages, and began reading, loudly, clearly, so every soldier in earshot could hear. 73 trucks observed, average capacity 66.2 persons per vehicle, total capacity 4,834. Current cargo, celebration supplies classified, critical morale priority. Children currently requiring medical evacuation from this facility, 263. Percentage of convoy capacity required, 5.4%. Children who have died waiting for evacuation in the past 4 weeks, 9. 9 children, Captain, dead, while we watched trucks carry Christmas packages and now party supplies past this hospital. So I'm asking you, as an officer of the Medical Corps, to explain the mathematics of that priority system. Captain Koch's face was red. "Lieutenant, you are obstructing a military convoy under proper orders. That's a court-martial offense. Stand aside immediately or I will have you arrested." "Then arrest me," Elisabeth said calmly. "But do it in front of all these soldiers, Captain. Do it where everyone can see that the punishment for asking why children die while we transport party supplies is military arrest. Make that official. Put it in writing. I'd like that documentation for my next report." Koch hesitated. Around them, soldiers were listening, watching. This was no longer a simple obstruction. It was becoming something else. A moment. A choice made visible. "You're putting me in an impossible position," Koch said, his voice lower now. "I'm in the same position these children have been in for weeks. Elisabeth replied. Impossible. The only difference is, I chose this. They didn't. Silence. The convoy sat idle, engines running, 73 trucks full of champagne and party decorations, while in the hospital behind them, 263 children waited. The mathematics hung in the air, undeniable, impossible to ignore now that it had been spoken aloud in front of witnesses. Then from the back of the convoy, a voice. Captain, we could take some of them. A driver. Unter Offizier, Sergeant, Hans Weber. Sir, my truck's carrying decorative bunting and celebration banners, maybe 400 kilos total. I could fit 20 children easy, more if they're small. Bunting can ride in another truck. Sergeant, you don't have authority, Koch began. Neither do I, another driver interrupted. Gefreiter, private first class. Otto Krantz. But I'm carrying party games and recreational equipment. Could fit 15, maybe 20 kids. Games are non-essential. Our truck has extra food rations, another voice called. For celebration feasts, the kids probably need food more than we need extra dessert. The moment was shifting. Koch could feel it. He was losing control, but more dangerous, he was losing the moral high ground. Every second he resisted, he looked worse. Every soldier volunteering made his position more untenable. This is irregular, Koch said weakly. Protocol requires we die while you party? Dr. Hartmann's voice cut across the road. The old physician had moved forward, standing beside Elisabeth. Captain, I'm Oberarzt Klaus Hartmann, Senior Medical Officer of this facility. I formally request emergency transport authorization for critical pediatric cases. You have capacity, you have authority to make field decisions regarding cargo priority. I'm asking you, doctor to officer, man to man, help us save these children. Koch looked at Elisabeth, at Hartmann, at his own soldiers now watching him, waiting for his decision. He looked at the hospital. He looked at his manifest of party supplies. And he looked at the mathematics that Elisabeth had made impossible to ignore. How many can we take? He asked finally. All of them, Elisabeth said immediately. That's not all of them, she repeated. Or we do this again with the next convoy and the one after that, until someone court-martials me or evacuates these children. Your choice, Captain. Koch closed his eyes briefly. Career suicide looked the same on everyone. Reorganize the convoy. Priority cargo only. Everything else gets redistributed. Make room for 263 children. The next 4 hours were controlled chaos. Trucks were unloaded, cargo redistributed, space created. The children were brought out in groups, wrapped in blankets, wide-eyed and uncertain. The youngest were carried. The oldest walked in careful single file. Soldiers helped load them, offered chocolate and kind words, transformed in an instant from party supply transporters to reluctant heroes. Elisabeth supervised every moment, her notebook now recording names and truck assignments, ensuring every child was accounted for. Maria would never make this journey. Neither would the 9 others who'd died waiting. But 187 would live because a convoy was stopped, because mathematics was spoken aloud, because someone finally said no to a system that valued party decorations over children's lives. As the last child was loaded, Oberstleutnant Mannheim appeared. He'd watched from his office window, had seen everything. He approached Elisabeth with an expression of profound weariness. You've destroyed your career, Lieutenant. Yes, sir. Captain Koch will file charges. Obstruction, insubordination, unauthorized modification of military operations. You'll face court-martial. Yes, sir. Was it worth it? Elisabeth looked at the trucks, now filled with children instead of champagne. Ask them in 20 years, sir. Mannheim was quiet for a long moment. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, I should have stopped a convoy weeks ago. I should have done what you did. I didn't because I was afraid. Afraid of ending my career, of bucking the system, of all the professional consequences you're about to face. You shamed me today, and you saved 187 lives. I'll testify to that at your court-martial. The convoy departed at 1400 hours. Elisabeth watched it roll away, children's faces visible through truck windows, small hands waving. Then she returned to her quarters and waited for the inevitable arrest. It came 3 days later. Military police, Formal charges, confinement to quarters pending disciplinary proceedings. The charges were extensive: obstruction of military operations, insubordination to superior officers, unauthorized interference with logistics operations, conduct unbecoming an officer. Together, they carried potential for dishonorable discharge and military prison. But something unexpected happened while Elisabeth awaited trial. Her story spread. Soldiers who'd been in that convoy talked. Nurses from Field Hospital 17 talked. And crucially, Corporal Schneider, the communications officer, made copies of Elisabeth's 11-page report and distributed it widely. It reached officers who'd never seen it when submitted through proper channels. It reached journalists attached to military units. It reached chaplains who read it to their congregations of soldiers. It reached people who could count. The mathematics were impossible to refute. Once people saw the numbers, the actual documented disparity between transport capacity and dying children, the moral arithmetic became inescapable. What had been invisible bureaucratic policy became visible injustice. The court-martial convened February 14, 1945. It lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented a thorough case. Elisabeth had violated clear orders, obstructed military operations, acted outside her authority. The defense was simple. She'd shown her calculations. Every transport log, every death record, every convoy observation. 11 pages of mathematics proving that 9 children died preventably while 73 trucks carried party supplies past their hospital. On the second day, something remarkable happened. Character witnesses appeared. Dozens of them. Dr. Hartman testified about the children Elisabeth had fought to save. Soldiers from the convoy testified about the cargo they'd been transporting. Mannheim himself testified, confirming every detail of Elisabeth's documentation and admitting his own failure to act sooner. And then Corporal Schneider testified about the regional command policy, the unofficial directive to deny evacuations from Field Hospital 17, to discourage civilian concentrations at military medical facilities. It was a policy decision that had killed children not out of necessity but out of administrative preference. The prosecution tried to suppress that testimony. Too late. It was already in the record. The verdict came on February 17, guilty of obstruction and insubordination. Sentence: reduction in rank, formal reprimand, reassignment, but no discharge, no prison. The panel couldn't quite bring themselves to destroy the career of a woman who'd proven, mathematically and irrefutably, that the system had chosen party supplies over children's lives. Elisabeth accepted the verdict with quiet dignity. She'd known the cost going in. She'd paid it. 187 children were alive. The mathematics were simple. But the story didn't end there, because Elisabeth's report, now widely circulated, forced changes. Regional command policy was officially revised. Field hospitals received authorization to evacuate civilian refugees without prior approval if medical necessity was documented. Transportation allocation procedures were modified to include humanitarian criteria. It wasn't a revolution. It was barely a reform. But it was acknowledgement that the mathematics mattered, that someone had to count, that children dying while trucks carried party supplies was a choice that could be changed. Elisabeth was reassigned to a hospital in the rear. Administrative duties, essentially sidelined for the remainder of the war. She accepted it. She'd never been fighting for her career. She'd been fighting for the truth that numbers tell. Years later, historians would analyze the logistics failures of the war's final year. They'd write about supply chain inefficiencies, about bureaucratic rigidity, about the gap between strategic planning and ground-level reality. Some of them would find Elisabeth's report in archived records, would cite her documentation as evidence of systemic dysfunction. They'd praise the thoroughness of her analysis, the precision of her calculations, but they'd miss the point. The point was never the system. The point was Maria's small fingers going limp. The point was Anna and Jakob and 133 other children whose names Elisabeth wrote in her notebook because someone needed to remember they weren't statistics. The point was that for 27 days, 73 trucks carrying party supplies had higher priority than 263 children dying in a hospital. And when someone finally said that aloud, When someone finally made the mathematics impossible to ignore, the system changed. Not because the numbers proved anything new. Everyone had known the numbers all along. The system changed because someone refused to pretend the numbers didn't matter. Decades later, in a military archive in Brussels, Elisabeth Brenner's leather notebook remains preserved. 11 pages of calculations, meticulous documentation of convoy movements and cargo priorities, and children's deaths. Museum visitors sometimes ask why this particular notebook is displayed, what makes it significant. The placard offers an explanation. Documentation compiled by Lieutenant Nurse Elisabeth Brenner, December 1944 through January 1945. Analysis of transportation, resource allocation leading to modified evacuation policies. But the real answer is simpler. It's there in the final entry, dated February 1st, 1945, written after her court-martial, after her reduction in rank, after everything. Just one sentence. We saved 187. The numbers proved we could have saved them all. That's the mathematics that matters. Not the trucks, not the capacity calculations, not the bureaucratic procedures. The mathematics that matters is the difference between what happened and what could have happened if someone had counted sooner. If someone had cared enough to make the numbers visible. Elisabeth Brenner died in 1993, 79 years old. Her military career having never recovered from that February court-martial. But at her funeral, 17 people attended who'd been children in Field Hospital 17. They came from 5 countries, brought their own children and grandchildren, stood together and remembered the woman who'd stepped into a road and refused to move until the mathematics of their lives equaled the mathematics of party supplies. One of them, a woman named Sophie Weber, who'd been 7 years old in that convoy, spoke briefly. She taught us that numbers are never just numbers. Every calculation has a human weight. And sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is count honestly and refuse to ignore what the count reveals. The leather notebook remains in the archive. Visitors can request to see it, can read the careful handwriting, the precise calculations, the undeniable mathematics of a system that chose convenience over children, until one woman made that choice impossible to hide. The last page contains no calculations, just a list. 187 names, the children who lived. And below that, in smaller script, for Anna, Maria, Jacob, and the others, may someone always count,